Haight-Ashbury look to you, Steve? What did you, when you went to Haight-Ashbury, what did you see? What did it mean?
Well, the architecture, of course, was, I guess, sort of 1920s San Francisco, and was neither good nor bad. It was just there. But the way of life was very different than conventional 50s America, certainly. And again, this was in the late 60s. There was the pad, as it was called. And sometimes it involved literal pads, just mattresses thrown around the floor. It didn't seem to be anybody's house. It was whoever happened to be in town that weekend, and often that could number 11 people or 14 people or 6 people. Men and women, sort of very relaxed. There was no such thing as the ladies' room or the men's room or the men's mattress, for that matter. It was all very relaxed. And 2 or 3 of the guys that were with him during the 2 or 3 days there were members of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang. But one thing that was on the plus side of the hippie culture was conversation was very easy. Conversation with conventional people, Americans or many others, is a bit stiff and formal. We're all familiar with jokes that Americans used to make about the English 50 years ago. 2 Englishmen were on a desert island surviving a shipwreck. They never spoke because they hadn't been formally introduced, jokes like that. So the hippie culture was at the opposite end. Formalities were overlooked or ignored. And everybody was on a hey man basis from the first moment that they might encounter each other. And there's something nice about that. We should all be that open, I think, with each other. But I don't remember any big philosophical discussions. I can't recall, honestly, what did go on. We went to a rock concert, during all of which I literally spent like this. I love music, but I don't like it when it's too loud. And we just sort of San Francisco'd it up for our 3 or 4 days together. But it was a very different experience once he was a member of the religious commune. They read only the Bible. Almost all the cults were Bible-based. And a lot of crazy ideas.
At this time, during the 60s, did you see that television was having an effect on the youth culture? Do you think it impacted the youth culture?
Yes, television had a very important effect, again, for good and for bad. TV has not created a great deal. It tends to reflect what is happening in society back onto society, while at the same time somehow managing to distort it. Sometimes this is unavoidable because maybe a given riot took place and it lasted 4 hours and 19 minutes before the last guy went home. But they can only show you 37 seconds of it that night on the Dan Rather News, So there's nothing you can do about that. You're not going to show a 4-hour tape of a 4-hour riot. But inevitably that does, as I say, lead to distortion. Also, it leads to exaggeration, that form of distortion. They're going to go where the excitement is. So if it was a more or less peaceful riot, let's say, or public demonstration that lasted for 4 hours, and during 3 of those minutes, 2 police beat up an old woman or whatever, that's where the cameras are going to go. So you get the impression that police were beating women up all that day, and it's a bum rap, in many cases. Or it's a bum rap if it shows 2 guys stringing up an effigy of President Johnson and burning it. So there's something that makes, I guess it reaches deep into the ego of people, even criminals. I sometimes think it's a mistake to show gang members, going like that to the camera while being fingerprinted or whatever, because they could all say, hey man, I was on TV last night. They may have killed 2 people to get there, and somehow the fact that they're on TV makes them a bigger guy in their gang, So there was always that going on in the 60s. Some of the revolutionaries wouldn't have seemed all that revolutionary or all that much of interest if they hadn't been on the TV news so often. I was not conscious at the time that the high school kids were becoming involved. They were, I think, through music. There was civilized hippie music, and then, in my view, uncivilized heavy music. I would define, for example, heavy metal as basically barbarous. You may like it or not, but I think it is an example of barbarian culture. But that was certainly not true of all the music of the 60s. Jimmy Webb wrote some of the finest songs ever written. By the time I get to Phoenix, Wichita Lineman and his other fine songs, Didn't We, and so forth. Peter, Paul, and Mary with their concentration on folk. The Beatles gave us some lovely songs. So there were always good elements in the music of the 60s, and they came to dominate the musical marketplace. And the big buyers of record albums are high school kids. So I think the high school kids got involved through the musical point of connection. Well, I never certainly washed my hands of America, no, but I was disturbed, probably no more or less than the average American, if you could put 1,000 average Americans of that day into a blender and pour out and make a new one out of them. I think I was probably normal in my reactions. I was shocked at scenes of violence, and you're supposed to be, whatever your own political bias is. Seeing a man bleeding is always shocking. That's why blood is red. But I was also from time to time angered at the excesses of both the left and the right, the rhetorical excesses and the physical excesses. The extremes always reinforce each other. The Birchers feed on the nuttier kinds of left revolutionaries, the weathermen, and they almost need each other. The Nazis need the communists. It's that kind of a classic and very depressing scenario. And it is, I use the word depressing just without even thinking of it in advance, but it is depressing. It's also anger-making. It's not what either the Greek philosophers or the founding fathers had in mind as a rational, civilized society in which one of the purposes of education is to be trained for citizen participation. And parenthetically, I'm very concerned about life as we move into the 90s now because of the incredible factual ignorance of the generation now in its 20s. And I think it's going to be worse with the following generation of young people. Yeah. Well, I myself participated in some marches and protests for civil rights, and I also participated in some marches and protests for the farm workers. I'm not looking for any credit for that. It was just as natural to me as going out to lunch or having a drink of water on a hot day. I think people should do that sort of thing, stand up and be counted, as we say. But as soon as it got to physical beatings and breaking windows and throwing actual or imitation blood on speakers, violating constitutional rights on college campuses, because those rights are damned important, and as soon as people would hoot down a speaker before he could even state his case, my normal reaction was very negative. And again, I'm not looking for credit for that, but it's negative now, it was negative then. And I'm interested in quality. I don't care if it was created by George Gershwin or some new kid that just shows up next Tuesday. If he's 18 years old and is really good, I'll kiss his feet because I love excellence. I love talent. The American people, whether in the 60s or now or 25 years ago, or 45 years ago, I mean, have never had any much interest in talent. They are sickly addicted to success. If you are successful, they will worship you. But if you're just talented, first of all, they don't even usually know that you are. I'm very sensitive to talent and other people, so I have booked a lot of folks who 10 years later became big. I knew they were that good the night I booked them, or before I booked them. I saw them someplace and I thought, "You're great, I'd like to have you on my show." They said, "Thank you," and they did it. And even sometimes when they were regular members of my family. Andy Williams is a great singer. Maybe today's 18-year-olds don't appreciate his kind of singing, or that of Sinatra for that matter, but he's a fine singer. And yet I couldn't get anybody excited about him until he had a hit record. And then suddenly said, "Boy, Andy Williams is a great singer." And I would think, and usually not say, "He's been that good for several years. Where were you, dummy?" You know. They were not reacting to his singing. They were reacting to the fact that he now has a hit. He's on the charts. He had won a gold record. So that's what the American people dig, and the hippies were the same in that regard. If somebody had a hit album, then they became idols. Before that, who knows?
Finally, in our last show, education's a big thing for you.
Yeah.
What happened to education in the 60s? And are we paying the price for it today, or was it a good thing?
One of the problem factors that has led to the present absolutely disgraceful, deplorable, even tragic condition of American education, leading to American ignorance, grew out of the 60s attitude. In some cases, it was okay, like that moment in The Graduate, where Dustin Hoffman is discussing what he might do after he gets out of school, and this purposely square actor playing the square character says, I have a suggestion for you in one word, plastics. A marvelous dramatic and symbolic moment. It was okay with me. I wasn't interested in plastics or working at a bank either. You know, I wanted to swing. So I felt that the hippies and I were on the same vibratory level there. But that only goes so far. So in school, if it was a matter of saying, I don't care whether I pass or not, so what? What do I have to know about European history anyway? At that point, they were wrong. And we're now seeing the result of that. That's not the only reason we have schools in such trouble now, but it's one of the reasons.
Is America a better place today because of the experience this country went through because of the 60s?
I suppose America today is both better and worse because we went through the 60s. It's always odd to speak on the philosophical or analytical level about the past. It's necessary and very worthwhile because we want to understand everything. We understand the past, hopefully, so that we can better prepare for and understand the future as it becomes the present. But, well, I suddenly forgot what I was leading to there. Oh, yeah, I'll give you a new take on that. There are good and bad things, as we've discussed, about the 60s. As to whether America is better because the 60s were what they were, there's no way of knowing, because to be scientific about that question, which is impossible, but if you play with the fantasy of being scientific, you'd have to crank the whole universe back to 1959 or 1961 or whatever. And this time, let's say we rule out certain kinds of rock music, we rule out long hair, now let's see what happens. Could be much worse, could be much better than what did happen. But that's all, playing with ideas to no particular point, I think.
How about in your own industry, television, entertainment? Has it benefited from the 60s? Has our acceptance of diversity and our ability to look at the world more broadly made it better, or have we gone too far in the other direction?
We always go too far in the other direction. Whatever the other direction is, man abuses everything. Man uses everything wrongly, whether you're talking about technology, religion, pea soup, or whatever you're talking about. Man will louse it up every time. But not in every case. Some good things happen too. Sometimes I think by chance or luck. So you're dealing here in this admirable series of shows with such complexity that you'd have to have a 6-year series, I think, to do justice to everything, as you've no doubt already perceived. All you're really being able to do, I guess, is paste a group of opinions from a number of individuals together. You'll get concurrence, you'll get disagreement, and ultimately the individual viewer will make up his own mind. It was a fascinating period of history of the 60s. I was honored to be alive during it, and I plan to keep that up.
Is your own industry, though, of television entertainment, do you think it has benefited from this decade?
Yes, there was a certain increase of freedom, which even granting abuses was invigorating. What we approve of, what any sensible person I think would approve of about the new freedom, is the enlargement of opportunities for creative expression. What unhappily is bad about the new freedom is that many people have abused it by just seeing how many vulgar words they can get into a script. I don't mind vulgarity at all on principle. I hope that doesn't come as a shock to some of my conservative friends. In other words, if you actually, or in a movie drama, really hit your thumb with the head of a hammer, we all know what kind of dialogue it is natural and legitimate to express at that time. A lot of dirty talk. God damn it, why did I do that? But if it's just a matter of pass the butter, which is now what you have, both in comedy and in casual drama, I've seen more rotten pictures that were made simply more objectionable because the writers thought, well, I guess very good. Maybe if we say a lot of dirty words, we'll keep people alive from adrenaline, at least for an hour and a half. That is terrible. It's a letting down of barriers. And it's a dreadful example for children. It's very difficult to argue with children today if they say something they shouldn't. We really don't want our 5-year-olds to talk as vulgarly as do some of our popular comedians. And in the old days, you could say, Tommy, don't do that. That's not nice. People don't like to hear that. and either from your own authority, or you could quote scripture or the laws of Illinois or whatever, they had to kind of give in on that. So America, by and large, did not grow up talking filth with every sentence. Now they have a great answer to the contrary. They can say, oh, is that bad? Well, how come who is the biggest comedian in America, does it every time he opens his mouth, and last year reportedly made $40 million doing it? It's a tough question to answer. It's still wrong, but the answering the question has become tougher because of this letting down the barriers.